So SaaS companies that will disappear, I think, are the ones who are very vertical, who aren't flexible. Those are the ones that will go away. I think the ones that know that they have to fundamentally change their value proposition are the ones that will either start new and thrive, or existing ones who do the right pivot.
The future doesn't wait for founders to feel ready. Markets shift, technology accelerates, teams evolve. The founders who win aren't the ones hoping for calm water. They're the ones who learn how to captain the ship, no matter what the sea looks like. And that's exactly what we do here, every week, without exception. We bring you the real conversations with founders who've been through the fire and the experts who know how to build what lasts. Founder Stories every Tuesday, Expert Strategy every Thursday. The intelligence you need to build bold, scale smart, and stay future-proof. This is Future-Proof Founder with your host, 5-time founder and globe-trotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the Future-Proof Founder podcast, where the thing that got you to 1 million is the exact thing quietly trying to kill you at 10. It's like a little growth assassin hiding in the shadows. I'm Jeff Maines, 5-time founder and your guide for the messy, magnificent climb from startup to 30 million and beyond. Here's what I believe. You can build a company that lasts and live a life worth remembering. Anyone who tells you to sacrifice one for the other is selling something. Building a business of significance while living an epic, adventurous life, that's the whole game. So let's get into it. Somewhere in your company right now, there is a spreadsheet that nobody will admit to loving, but everyone is quietly terrified of breaking. It has color-coded tabs, a system that only one person fully understands, and it's somehow holding together a process that your entire revenue stream depends on. Sound familiar? If it doesn't, then you need to do a little more digging, because here's the thing. When you're scaling, the biggest threat to your growth isn't your competition, your market, or your tech stack. It's the invisible web of workarounds that your team has built to survive the chaos, and the fact that everyone's too busy to replace them. Most leaders go hunting for shiny new software solutions the moment operations start creaking. But buying better tools without fixing the underlying human behavior is like upgrading the dashboard on a car with no engine. I mean, it looks great, really cool, but it goes nowhere. In today's episode, we're digging into what it actually takes to build operations at scale, not just for the team you have today, but for the company you're trying to become. You'll hear why most digital transformation projects fail before they even start, what single player thinking is doing to your internal systems, and how the smartest operators are rethinking the relationship between their data, their people, and their tools. If your business runs on duct tape and good intentions, this one is going to hit really close to home in the best possible way. My guest today is Justin Watt, CEO and co-founder of Switchboard. Justin works with operations and systems leaders to replace messy manual processes with connected, scalable workflows without adding headcount or unnecessary complexity, which all of us have enough of to start with. Love that he's fixing that. Welcome someone who believes the answer to most operational problems isn't more people, it's a smarter system. Justin Watt. Hey, Justin, welcome to Future Proof Founder.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You originally leaned towards psychology before moving into technology. I think those are much more closely related than a lot of people think. But how has your understanding of people shaped the way you think about systems and operations today?
I would say that I often say this with clients who come to us saying, what do we do with AI? And our business is a mess in some shape or form. Usually they're harder on themselves than they need to be. But point being, I always share that in my learnings over the years, every business challenge is a human challenge. Very rarely can we not solve something technically or come up with a solution that would work. It is the human part of it. And I think the thing that I often think about is that famous McKinsey metric of 65 or 75% of all digital transformation projects fail. I think what they failed to disclose is like 90% of that is at the change management part. It's because people fear change and worry about it. Yeah, exactly. It's the how do we get humans to understand the classic who, what, why, how in a way that resonates for them where they're bought in. So it's not the equivalent of giving a 16-year-old keys to a car with their new license and going, good luck. Like you have to sit with them and this is how you shoulder check and this is how you parallel park and that's how you avoid an accident. And it's the same thing with business and the psychology of it. It might be oversimplifying and I'm not saying I'm definitively right, but it feels to me like the vast majority of business challenges are human challenges.
It makes a lot of sense because it's real easy for us to fall back into what we know and just what's
Yeah.
comfortable instead of pushing forward into what's new and maybe uncomfortable and sometimes unknown.
Yeah, and the call it the current PR narrative around AI is not doing it any help because people operate out of a place of fear if that's all that they know. And with AI, because it's so new and people are figuring it out, they don't know how it works and what it means for them. So they default to that place of fear of why would I even care about this or want to be open to this if I'm being told on the flip side it's going to take my job or whatever it is, which I personally don't think is going to it'll play out that way, but that's a whole other topic. But to your point, yeah, there's that fear-based side of it.
You spent years at IBM. Everybody knows IBM, and then helped scale MetaLab during a massive growth phase. What do those two environments teach you about how teams operate at completely different scales?
Yeah, like IBM side, there was a binder. This is how long ago it was, but a binder full of paper with just acronyms and to work with specific government agencies to roll out these massive pieces of software or IT rollouts. There would be an acronym binder that you'd have to learn before you start working with them as a client. And so just that scale that you work at, you start to realize what not to do as much as what to do because a lot of enterprise transformation and changing your business at a very large level is just if you let it can turn into a meeting about a decision that should have been
Right.
made 6 weeks ago in an email. And so I found at IBM, for all the good that I learned there, I learned as much what not to do and how not to approach things as I did what to do. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, I got to be a part of when they were sub 30 or 40 people. And over the 7 years there, got to work both client side, which was very cool to work with the cool startups like an Uber at the time was still growing and working with established tech companies like an Amazon, which I don't share as a name drop. It's more of just getting to see the inner workings of these companies and help them build products. Taught me that most businesses are better served functioning like a product. I think a lot of people get burnt out in their jobs and their careers because there's constant change and no one communicates anything properly. And it's all just here's an email memo about this, here's a SOP about
Right.
that. And getting to see the way that tech companies approach their company itself is often like how they approach building the work that they do in the world. So Uber as an example, getting to see how a team builds the product is cool, but getting to see how they operate internally when they roll out process change. If you treat it like a product of let's stage it as a release, just like you download Airbnb in the App Store today is not the same as 5 years ago. But you go to the App Store and you hit update and it's got change notes and whatnot. And they've tested those. They've
Right.
thought about how it's communicated. And so getting to be client side at MedLab was cool to frame my thinking about how to build a company more effectively if people consider tech companies to be well run. And then internally, we got to grow over time. So I got to start playing around with no code and automation. And I wouldn't say AI because we started this right around when ChatGPT came out. But at the same time, getting to be early days of figuring out how can you automate stuff? What is worth automating? How do you need to factor in the human side of it? Got to learn a lot about that, which led to, I think, that perfect storm of when AI came in. Obviously, we're here where everyone's going, we have to rethink our business. It's been a good toolkit to get to use.
That's good. You eventually shifted from product to internal operations. What is it that made you realize operational friction, not product ideas, is often the thing holding companies back?
On its face is if the organization doesn't run effectively, how can you ship product effectively and do your work effectively? And so I
Mm,
think the same thing applies to these companies as it does to any company where if it's messy, to put it politely, as a company, the way it's run, then the work becomes less effective. And people, yes, they're there for a paycheck and the company is giving them money to be there and do the job itself. But people want fulfillment out of their jobs. And if most of their job is reading the ninth version of an SOP that'll be out of date and no one's actually following, or looking at another all hands recording to understand what changes are coming, even though it contradicts something that they heard in another meeting from someone else. That kind of like approach just makes things so messy and people's job satisfaction and fulfillment goes down. So that's why I think internal
yeah.
operations is so important because if you do it effectively, then it should be invisible. And it should feel like I was told by a boss years ago, it should feel like Switzerland. Good internal operations shouldn't try to control everyone. It shouldn't try to tell people exactly how they need to think and what to do. You're hiring people because they're smart and are being told you're effective and we trust you to do this well. So if internal operations is constantly making that messy, it makes the company and its output, whether that's a product, app, or a service, less effective too. So that's why I think it's important. This is my rambly answer.
That makes a lot of sense. And today, Switchboard focuses on turning messy manual work. And I like that because it's really true. If we
Mm.
look at a lot of the things we do, it is messy, it is manual, but you turn that into scalable systems. What kind of operational chaos do mid-sized companies normalize without really realizing how much it's costing them or affecting their productivity?
Yeah, this is why everyone has their opinions on SaaS and the state of what software is anymore. But I think that's misleading. I think the main focus to your question of what tends to be messy at mid-market and what do we unpack the most is spreadsheets. I think people don't realize that like the year that Back to the Future came out in theaters is the year that spreadsheets or Excel was released. That's how old it
Wow.
is. And it still blows my mind that the majority of companies function on spreadsheets, even mid-market, even enterprise.
Yeah.
So there's with they didn't end up becoming a client for reasons that'll be apparent in a moment, but the fellow was running, but I think it was about a 200-person company, and he said, "Oh, we've got data infrastructure. We're running great with data. Like you guys will, it'll be a walk in the park for you." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Could I just see?" This was our second or third call, signed an NDA. So I was like, "Could I see how data set up?" He's, "Oh yeah, I'll show you the data lake." He literally pulled up an Excel file called data lake.
The data lake, we'll put that in quotes. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are people laughing about that right now. That's the data lake.
Yeah. And it was 200 people, not 200, but probably about 40 or 50 people every week. Half their job was just going through the 18 different tabs and thousands of rows per and just updating information all over the place, which is
Wow.
wild to think. But that tends to be the kind of chaos that we walk into. It's not, how do I replace Salesforce tomorrow when I vibe coded something on the weekend with AI and I want to turn it into our own CRM? That often is where things can lead, but more often than not, it starts with we've got 600 people and 300 of them spend 35 out of 40 hours a week in spreadsheets and updating stuff and
Yeah.
passing them around. And that's often what we're trying to solve for.
And a lot of that is workarounds too. I see that so often that the software really doesn't do this thing, and so we have a spreadsheet, and so we do it over here and we track it, or even things that it does do.
Yeah.
It's because they used to use a spreadsheet, and now somebody wants them to put it in a system. They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. We'll put a little bit of that in the system, but we're still using our spreadsheets, and it just goes back to that user adoption, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's so often lost on people. We have a source of truth. We have a HubSpot or a Salesforce as a CRM. If you imagine every business as that starting point of it's a lead or customer, potential customer, whatever it might be, they usually will start with something like a CRM. But there's all of the work that comes after that might be an app or a piece of software with users, or it might be a service with customers or clients, whatever it is. Most people, I think, don't realize that the workarounds are the job for most people because they're trying to figure
Yes.
out if the CRM covers up until they sign a contract and become a customer. There's or a user, whatever it might be. There's all this work we have to do after. So half the company turns into Salesforce solves for the sales part. And yes, it can solve for customer support and whatever else, but most people don't use that, even in mid market. So, point being, they export everything out of Salesforce into a spreadsheet that they've morphed into their own personal app to do
Right.
their job. And so they're solving for very small parts of the workflows with these CRMs that are thought of as a source of truth, but really it's a starting point for most people's job.
I think that's a scary thing is companies are growing and people are changing or even acquisitions. How much of what you really know about the company is there and is that in that source of truth and how much of it is buried in those little workarounds and spreadsheets and the way that people work outside of the normal system just because either that's what they're comfortable with or that's what they have to do in order to get their job done.
Yeah, and when people don't have a solution, they'll fall back on what they know. And so,
Sure.
like a very quick example is we worked with a client that had different rates for different services and different customers that they had. And because they didn't have a source of truth for that, and no one was told how to manage their rates to that point that you just made people falling back on what they know, they had, I think it was their rate card was 14,000 Excel rows when we brought it all into one place. This was after we had gone through 6 different Excel files because their rate cards were everyone just doing it their own way. And this company could have 400 rows for their rate card and it was 14,000. And I think that's just an example of people fall back on what they know if they're not given a solution. And then that temporary workaround becomes the permanent solution. And then the company just continues on that way for a decade or more sometimes.
That's a long time.
Too long.
Just thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of companies think about internal software. It should be quick and cheap. Prototypes look polished, Why do you think there's a disconnect between expectations and reality? That they look at it and they're like, hey, this new thing that we're going to get is going to solve all our problems and eliminate all these spreadsheets. And then the reality is it doesn't.
Think usually because people are looking for a silver bullet and they won't invest the time to do it right. We probably say no to as many clients as we say yes to because so many people say, we want some magical piece of software with AI weaved into it in 2 months, and this will be our solution. And that's speaking in my experience. What that equates to more generally, to answer your question, is what you're really trying to do is solve for human process and human judgment as much as possible so that either the humans have a better system to manage things through and make their own judgment calls with the right information at their fingertips, or where AI comes into play, which is it helps with the judgment and making decisions and moving things along. But if you don't spend the time saying, what are the edge cases? How does this workflow actually work? What are all the inputs? What are all the outputs? And you just say, just talk to the director of that department and he'll tell you how it works and just build a solution based on that. You have to go a layer deeper and chat with, in finance, there's a director of finance, but he has 6 analysts that all have their own mandate and their own way of doing things. And not solving for that means you're doing it for nothing. If you're only solving for leadership, that tends to be a very small amount of the operational improvements that you see in a business. You want to solve for the ICs and the folks in the weeds, so to speak, because that's where the solutions are.
That's really good. You talked about the hidden complexity behind real business applications. What do founders constantly underestimate about maintenance, security, long term ownership? They're thinking about vibe coding something or maybe have. But what is it that they're missing?
I think, and I know a lot of your audience is software founders and they've probably done it many times before and they know exactly what to look for. But
Right.
because of the lower barrier to entry and folks with non technical backgrounds vibe coding something, which I think is okay by and large, but what they tend to overlook, with that caveat in mind, of some folks listening might be like, duh, I know all this. But what folks tend to overlook is building something for yourself is very different than building it for a team. So it's that, if
Yes.
you think of it like that video game equivalent of single player versus multiplayer, the way that you play a single player game when it's no internet connection required, it's just you going through a story that's on guardrails, is very different than dropping into Fortnite or Roblox or Call of Duty, where you're in an open environment with no guardrails and there's 300 other people in the same place who also have no guardrails. Is a very different environment of play. And I think businesses, taking that analogy to a business, vibe coding something for yourself where you know exactly what you're going to give it, what output you expect. You've only got your one SharePoint or Google Drive folder you're pointing at for context, is very different than these 7 people have different ways of giving inputs. The location of all the files is in different places, or context that it needs, whatever that might be, is different. Not to mention, if it's software, what if you as one person are in there editing, let's say a CRM equivalent, and you're editing a deal? That's fine. But what if 4 people are in that deal at the same time and editing that same deal? What happens then? And it's very different technical environment and backend that you have to have for infrastructure. And so I think folks not knowing how that works, for those who are vibe coding and that's all that they know on the technical side, they aren't solving for the multiplayer experience very often, and B, when you solve for the multiplayer, you're inherently bringing up a ton of security risks and permission issues.
Right.
And we saw that. We had someone who came to us with, I vibe coded this for my company, I want to roll it out. And they didn't realize that in the vibe coding single player experience, it worked well because they were the COO of the company and they already had access to all the information that they needed to fulfill these workflows in HR. If
Ah,
they
got it.
turn this into a HR source of truth piece of software for their company without checking, they didn't. Luckily, we flagged it for them, but they didn't and wouldn't have realized, when we invite everyone else into this, they can see the compensation and the performance reviews of everyone else in the company. And so again, it's that difference between that single player versus multiplayer environment. The way that you set up a product technically is very different when you have to consider not only external security, but even just the internal security and permissions of a COO account. Might be able to look at the performance reviews and pay history for everyone in the company, but should the intern who just started 2 weeks ago be able to see that? Probably not. So those are some of the common things that I see folks not thinking about or not
That's
aware
a
of.
really big one. I think security is one of the things that is probably one of the most overlooked. And just because people don't know what great security is or all that goes into just the thinking process, even just like the OWASP top 10, testing apps for something that that's one of those things that everybody knows about. But if you're vibe coding something, you probably don't and you wouldn't even know to look for those kinds of things. but just very simple things that they don't think about. Hey, get excited, let's roll this out. And I think that's going to be very interesting over the next few years just to see what types of solutions are being promoted and even what's on the market. I think that's a real challenge today is somebody makes something up and they built it last weekend and they're promoting it as a solution, buy this and put it in your company, but it's really untested in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, and that's the whole other side of this too, as one final note on it, is multi-tenant. As in if you're building a
Oh
SaaS
yeah.
that is meant to be for 400 companies sign up for this, and each of the 400 companies has even just 10 employees, like that's now 4,000 people using your app at the same time. And again, the technical infrastructure has to be very different. And people don't think on the SaaS side or SaaSifying a product that they roll out to 4,000 people potentially in 400 companies is extremely different. Not only security, but also performance and all that fun stuff too.
There's a narrative right now, and you mentioned this or alluded to it earlier. SaaS is dead. I actually did a whole video series about this, and I think SaaS as we know it is dead. And what replaces it is what the whole series is about and how to think about the future. But what
Mhm.
do you think some software companies will, why do you think some of them will disappear and some will become even more valuable? We're definitely at a kind of a crossroads here.
Yeah, I think in a lot of my conversations with folks, like execs who are thinking about this stuff, a common theme I often see is, I guess what I would sum up as, we've been working with these SaaS companies for a decade and they've never done what we wanted. So why would we trust them now to get it right in this new era? Like they just put AI and a sparkle emoji on their website and said, we're going to solve all your needs with AI. But they've had a
Right.
decade to do this. So why would we trust them now? So the mental math folks are doing, because it's become so much easier to build your own software and it will progressively get easier, the mental math is no longer, oh, it's cheaper to use a SaaS because we'd have to either hire someone for 4 developers for 18 months to build the equivalent, or we'd have to hire internally and forever have internal developers. 4 developers at 18 months was 2 years ago. You can build, I see it every day, you can build roughly the same equivalent with 2 developers in 4 or 5 months. If they know what they're doing. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be vibe coding this. This is developers who know what good architecture and security looks like and whatnot. But
Correct.
point being, the mental math has changed for people. And so SaaS companies that will disappear, I think, are the ones who are very vertical, who aren't flexible, who have had features that the majority of their customer user base has been asking for, that have sat on a roadmap for 3 4 years they've never delivered on. Those are the ones that will go away. I think the ones that know that they have to fundamentally change their value proposition are the ones that will either start new and thrive, or existing ones who do the right pivot. I think Notion is a good example of that, where they've got huge announcements probably every month now of, here's what we're
Yes.
doing. It started with the simple stuff of our developer documentation. You can now copy as a prompt and put it in ChatGPT. And now they're at a point of, we've got MCPs, we've got APIs just for AI, we've got agents that you can install in your own environment, or you can connect to ours with CLI. Like they just have this infrastructure that it's not as much about the product itself anymore. It's more about the product plus the infrastructure to help you level up. Not just, oh, we've got a product and we put a chatbot at the bottom right corner. And it's these folks who are, I think, what some have come to call headless approach, where
Yes.
it's not really about the product anymore. It's about the data and facilitation of that. Because I would argue we're now at a point of every quarter, there's that step function change of AI where like interfaces aren't going to be that important. You can spin up an interface on the fly and give exactly what each person needs. It's the data that is underneath it that is the important part.
Correct. And that brings up an interesting point, be that important. And Notion is a great example of this and how they've built AIs or they built APIs specifically for AI agents.
Yeah.
Because the new users, they're not sitting in chairs, they don't have keyboards and they don't have monitors, they're not using the UI, they're just getting direct access to the data.
Yeah.
And they've done really well at that. I'm watching their journey and love to see what progresses and where they end up. Other companies have gone the other way and said, we're not allowing AI agents to access our stuff. There's an accounting system that's that way.
Yeah.
And I look at it as that makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been, and I keep bringing them up. I'm not trying to pick on them, but it's been interesting to watch the Salesforce PR machine working the last year of, oh, we have AI in the product. That didn't really fly because everyone already heard about Einstein and was like, it's all made up. Then they pivoted
Right.
to, okay, then we are going to lock everything down so that you are forced to stick with us because we know we'll get the AI in the product right over time, but like we're going to lock down every other AI who's doing better than us at connecting to us. And then that didn't work because everyone else was like, that's not the way to go. Where Notion's a good example of like they went the opposite route. And
Right.
now the CEO said it a couple weeks ago. The headline was Salesforce goes headless. And so they're on their, call it third pivot of how they're approaching AI. And everyone's figuring it out as they go. But I think that's the big thing is that headless approach where it doesn't really matter what's in the product. It matters the infrastructure it facilitates for you to use your AI how you see fit more effectively, which is what people want. And that's always been the downside of SaaS of their goal is to appeal to the lowest common denominator of someone who will sign up and pay the money. So inherently, every industry that say uses an Asana or a Monday.com or sometimes even a Notion, they can feel overwhelming all these different products because their goal is to make it work for everyone. And they're towing that
Right.
line of flexibility for anyone from any industry would find value out of it. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, the fact that they can't give everyone what they want, so they just do a kitchen sink and hope people figure it out for themselves. So again, going back to that mental math, if those are the two ends of the spectrum, which no one really likes as an end user, and the solution now is I can build exactly what I want in the way that I want it for my company and our needs specifically, I'll just do that.
It's an amazing time to be in the space.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Good overwhelming, but it is
It is.
overwhelming.
As we were talking earlier, I always feel behind. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I think I'm using AI in some really creative ways, and then I get around other people that are doing just unbelievable things,
Yeah.
and I love that. But I always feel behind.
Yeah, I just met with my AI solutions for people, but like we also use it internally. And the line I keep towing with even our own team is my goal is for you to be better than you were last week with it. There is not a world in which
Yes.
you will be the best. And anyone who says that they're the best expert with AI is lying because, or they're either lying to others or themselves because it's
Or
impossible to
both.
keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah, or both because it's impossible to keep up. We went from a news cycle of big announcements that you'd have time to play catch up on quarterly, and then it became monthly, and then it became weekly, and I would argue we're at daily where things are changing
Pretty
that much
much.
often that like you have to keep in touch daily with what's going on to truly be at the cutting edge of being effective with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know where the cutting edge is anymore, because
Yeah.
it's changing so fast and trying to keep up and implement. And but it's not just chasing shiny objects, because that's easy to do, but it's figuring out what is the problem I'm trying to solve, and is AI even the right solution, and if it is, then what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a conversation I have often with folks of they'll come to us and say, "We want AI." And I'm like, "What does that mean? What are we talking about here?" And usually where the conversation lands is if you think about, again, I know this is overly simplifying, it's not this easy, but if you think generally of a business through the lens of it's an assembly line of some sort, it's the fact that you need to document what is the assembly line, what is the happy path of the assembly line, and where does AI fit in those steps. So if you think about, again, to keep it overly simple, of generally a business at a high level, their workflow to accomplish what they do as a business is 20 steps. Saying I need AI doesn't mean all 20 steps need AI. It means step 2, step 8, step 12, step 14.
Yes.
If you get the process documented, which goes back to our earlier discussion, like every challenge is business challenge is a human challenge. You're trying to work with the humans to understand what is the ideal process here, and then where can AI slot in to help. And yes, we may get to a world where AI does all 20 steps, but I don't think that's anytime soon. And so therefore, how do you keep a human in the loop, and what parts of a process do you solve for with AI? Because the shotgun blast is a sniper rifle, not a shotgun blast. There is
Yes.
no world in which it makes sense to apply it to every facet of every business in every workflow that they have.
Yeah, it doesn't add value at every
No.
step. And so I think it's picking those steps where it does add value, and where it really adds value to the end user, not just where it's convenient for us, because that's pretty easy,
Yeah,
but
which
where
is
the end user gets value out of it.
yeah, and that's the one of the questions that I inevitably always ask, what is your goal with it? What does success look like here?
Yeah.
Which is a classic consultative question, but I think everyone should be asking themselves that question as a founder or C-suite thinking about AI right now is what is the goal? Because if the goal is we want AI, then it's theater, it's transformation theater, and no one's going to
Yes.
be happy. But if you have a specific goal, whether that is as high level as we want to improve our margins, so we need to be more efficient, all the way to our customer support team keeps quitting and we have huge turnover and customer dissatisfaction because it takes so long to get an answer for basic questions. There's two very different goals. But if you look at, we want AI through either of those lenses, you then start to have that prism of, oh, this is what's going on. These are the opportunities. This is how you would solve it, and becomes an easier answer if you think about the goal first.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier, AI has dramatically compressed development timelines. How do you think that has changed the way that clients value software work and just the value of software overall?
Given your audience, I'll say this more bluntly. I think non-technical folks have never understood the value of software and the development and the complexity of it. And I've been doing this long enough that I feel like I can say that very confidently. But it's not coming from a place of disdain or resentment. It's the facts of, you show code, like an IDE full of code, to someone who's a non-technical person, and it looks like gibberish. But a developer knows that this is a class and it calls that function, and that when it displays for
Right.
the front end, it needs to pull from an API and look visually clean. And the CSS itself took forever because we couldn't center a div. Like, all of this effort that goes into building software is lost on most technical people. So again, to what I'm seeing is, it's folks who already didn't understand the value and why something would take 6 months for 5 developers to do. All they know now is, oh, this thing that I really wanted in my business that was hard and expensive and complex and time consuming to do, is now, all of that is cut in half, let's say. That's what
Right.
they equate it to. So their mental math is, if this would have cost X amount of dollars or time before, it is half that. And that's really what they come to the table with, to be blunt.
Yeah. What do you think that means for the future role of developers, product managers, operational leaders? Because it is compressed significantly.
Thinking about this a lot too, for what are our titles and our departmental structure in this new era for ourselves. And I see it with clients too. Because if we're talking just about the function of product, if you think of product as a function, and that function comprised of product people, but engineering, product designers, UX research, etc., because of the progress in software development with AI, that entire industry is collapsing on itself right now. Product managers are shipping code, designers are building prototypes, developers
Yeah.
are, I think developers are spending a lot of time reviewing PRs now, but they, when they don't have to do that, they themselves, those who are using it well, are saying, yes, there's some slop here and there, but the net is, I'm 25% faster, I'm 150% faster. And so, to
Yeah.
answer your question, with these roles collapsing on themselves, I honestly think there's not going to be an answer for probably at least a year, maybe two, because I think everyone, us included, is trying to figure out, if a designer can prototype, but they don't actually know the code, and so they're sending slop in, or a developer who can build a prototype because they just had an idea, but they have no product mindset or UX research to validate that someone would actually hate that feature, or they tried it and it didn't work for XYZ reasons. That, I think, is why it's going to take a while to figure out, because just because you can doesn't mean you should, as the classic
Yeah.
phrase goes. And I think that's what product is trying to figure out. But to me, it's a canary in the coal mine that's fascinating to watch, because it's code that is one of the first things that is a mass application of AI effectively in the workplace. And it's just one role. That one role being solved for has made that entire function in one industry collapse on itself to say, what are we doing here anymore? And that's going to apply to every role in every department in every company in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Seems like a lot of times senior engineers are maybe a little more resistant to AI driven development. Why do you think experience sometimes creates that friction instead of adaptability?
We work with a lot of engineering leaders, so I think I have enough data points to say this very easily now. I would say it's summarized as lack of curiosity. I think, if
Hmm.
usually the same developers who are resistant to the changes that are happening are the same developers who are the first to tell you that they're a senior developer or an expert at whatever framework or language.
Right.
Those who, I find, again, personal opinion, but I talk to enough folks in engineering leadership and ICs that I think the point stands, is those who probably are senior on paper, but they don't pretend to be an expert in engineering, which is why I love engineering. No one can truly be an expert. There's way too much to know.
Right.
And so those folks who have that low ego tend to be curious folks, and curious folks want to embrace change and they want to learn about something new. And so that, I find, is the mindset shift. So I know that's probably not a specific answer, but what I find is that curiosity is what it can all be distilled down to. If you're curious by nature and have a low ego about what you do, you view this as a positive potential for you, your career, your industry. And those who have a high ego and low curiosity about it are the ones who are resistant.
Yeah. Thinking about just the SaaS market overall, is we're moving into a new era.
Yeah.
SaaS companies traditionally have really relied a lot on lock-in, and whether that's data lock-in, pricing, seats, contract length, those kinds of things, and not love. Companies are using solutions because that's what they have. It's not because they love it or not because it's the best. How should developers think, or founders think about intentionally building against that mindset, where they're really building for love because lock-in is disappearing?
Yeah, I think this why there's a both a reckoning and a constant conversation of opinions that everyone thinks their own is right or they found the solution and the next day there's a new blog post with an opinion that they changed their mind. I think
Yep.
comes down to we don't know where this is going in terms of the end user. We don't know if the chat interface is going to stick around long enough that you need to optimize for data and you're charging by data and people don't actually love your product. They love what it unlocks for them somewhere else in a Claude or ChatGPT window
Yep.
or a coding session or whatever it might be. So assuming that's not going to be the case long term though, where everyone lives in chat windows forever, assuming then that we want to get off of that, knowing that software can be built so quickly and so customized to the needs, optimizing again for the data I think still makes sense because it's likely that your solution either can build workflows and the interfaces that live on top of them on the fly, or you build the data where the company has a solution that knows their industry, knows their business, knows their people, and builds an interface on top of it. So I think no matter what, that headless approach, which is why I think that headline is popular around Slack or whatever it might be, I think that's why that's creeping up more and more because we don't technically know yet. But I think both solutions point back to people love your product if the data is accessible.
Makes sense. It certainly makes it more valuable. I think that's one of the few moats that are left, is data moat, and the ability to make your users smarter. The longer they use your system, the more they use your system, the more value they get from the data that they generate.
And the more data they can put in it. I think that's why
Yes.
so many people resent having the SaaS bills that they do because there isn't a solution that treats their client data in a way that their financial SaaS would want to treat their client data versus the way that their
Correct.
customer support tool would want to treat that data. So the more centralized your data can be, but used in different ways, that's what we're always looking for when clients are like, "What should we do with data?" And it's, God, we wish there was a solution that adapted on the fly to what they need.
For founders who are trying to automate their operations right now and clean up some of the messy stuff and optimize it, how do they avoid creating faster chaos instead of better systems?
I think it goes back to that. What is your goal? And last time or earlier when we chatted about it, it was like, what is your goal with AI overall? If
Yeah.
you're thinking about automation, I think it's very different. It's the same question, but applied very differently is what is the goal of this workflow? What is the goal of the automation? And then you can work backwards of therefore we need to figure out process level to this detail. If it's a simple process of sign a new user or client or customer and we have to send them a contract, like that probably is a few steps and a few tools involved. If it is when we sign that contract, we are providing a service that takes 2 months to fulfill with 9 people involved. And so the question still is what is the goal, but it's what is the goal of this automation? Because if you can answer that and it still feels like at the end of it, yes, this is valuable to do, whether it's ROI of effectiveness and efficiency, or we don't need 9 people to do this. We can actually do it with 6 because 3 people are just spending time copy and pasting spreadsheet cells. Tends to give you your answer of is this worth doing? Or how do
Yeah.
we prioritize the opportunities that we have to automate?
As AI is reshaping software development, where do you think that human judgment and operational thinking will become more valuable, not less?
I would say the judgment at an expert level where a lot of data points come together, a lot of disparate data points come together to make a decision will become important, but it'll become more and more important for the humans in the loop. And the analogy I would think of is if you go to NASA and say, I want a rocket, you're going to find a rocket scientist, but that rocket scientist doesn't build it alone. It hires a
Right.
team, and that team is comprised of PhDs with science backgrounds, all the way to someone in operations who's procuring the metal that is going to be wrapped around or the fuel that's going to sit inside of the tanks or whatever it might be. And so I think it's the same analogy of that rocket scientist will always be important because they understand the orchestration of all these different things that come together. And a lot of their judgment is when new constraints are added. The procurement person says this metal is going to take 9 months, and the scientists calculating the trajectory of the trip say it's going to take 6 months to do the trip. We don't have 9 months. That's the same
Right.
equivalent with AI of little things like that, of each person having that judgment of this is an issue we need to flag, versus the rocket scientist who, I hear from 10 people all these different constraints and I need to make a decision based on this. I think that I might have leaned into that analogy too much, but that kind of judgment at that level will always be important. And I don't think we're going to solve anytime soon. Eventually, maybe, but not anytime soon for that level of judgment.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, for founders who are scaling up people along with their AI, what's an operational principle that becomes absolutely critical before complexity starts compounding against them, especially as they scale double, triple the number of people that they have?
And with AI that they're using and rolling out and upskilling people in as they grow, or just in general?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think the AI is probably going to roll out alongside that, but you're still going to be hiring people, and we're seeing that a lot in the space. Roles are different,
Yeah.
but how do they scale that without complexity compounding against them while they scale?
Yeah. Good rubric, which helps clarify, because now that I understand better, sorry, that kind of question I get often. And the rubric usually becomes, if you doubled in size tomorrow, what's going to feel the most painful or what breaks the worst? And usually someone leadership level will be able to answer that in 5 seconds. Like there's always something that keeps a founder or CEO up at night. There's always a specific thing on someone's mind of when they refer to how XYZ department works, they go, ugh, yeah, we know. Those kinds of things are where to focus, because those tend to be the human challenges. The business challenges where it's not keeping you up at night, you're not thinking about it. If you doubled your headcount tomorrow, it would need improvement, but it's not that top of mind thing of, oh, if we doubled tomorrow, it would break. We would be crippled logistically, or we would be set back in our ability to achieve targets because of, like, whatever it might be. I won't belabor it, but it is that mindset of, if we double tomorrow, someone usually will have top of mind, this is what breaks the most or first.
Love that. Where can people learn more about you online?
We are, what is our website? We are at switchboard.com. Unfortunately, switchboard.com was not available, but with switchboard.com, or feel free to reach out by LinkedIn, Justin Watt on there, and happy to chat with anyone who wants to chat further about any of this.
We'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes. And Justin, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for being on Future Proof Founder.
Jeff, goes both ways. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Justin, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Justin and Switchboard at withswitchboard.com. And there you can learn all the things you can do with Switchboard. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at getfutureproof.com. And be sure to check out our channel on YouTube as well. It's at Champion Leadership. Lots of resources over there for you. Now, thought leaders share. Share this episode with the founder willing to dismantle what's working because they can see what's coming. Everyone who shares today gets a head start on the next stage. Here's my future-proof takeaway. Your ops problem isn't a tech problem. It is a people problem wearing a spreadsheet costume. Now, every single workaround that our teams build to survive a broken process, it's not laziness. It's them solving a problem that we didn't as leaders. So before we go out and buy another tool, find the person still doing it by hand and ask them why. What is it that you're doing? Why do you do it that way? And I think that is the roadmap. Build a company that way, solve for the human first. And you don't just get efficient, you get a place where people are rewarded for innovation, for finding better ways to do things. It's a place where people feel seen, their ideas matter, and they can have an impact. You start doing that, it creates a flywheel. But most importantly, it becomes a place that people actually want to stay. And that is the game. Coming up on Thursday, we have a SaaS executive who left the growth at all costs playbook behind to build technology rooted in faith, purpose, and human connection. And you know what he found? Founders are super hungry for exactly that. And then 1 week from today, the developer founders call when their offshore build failed, their runway is burning, and they need someone who can tell them the truth fast. I'll see you next time. And as always, enjoy the journey.
Build bold, scale smart, stay future-proof. This is Future Proof Founder with Jeff Maines.